Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our second of two cover crop grazing webinars this fall. My name is Christine O'Reilly. I'm the forage and grazing specialist with OMAFRA, and I'm going to be moderating this evening's program. I would also like to thank the committee that put this together. So it was a joint effort between OMAFRA, Beef Farmers of Ontario, and Ontario Sheep Farmers. Our committee consisted of James Byrne, myself, Jake Monroe, Andrew Barry, and Laura Scott from OMAFRA, Bethany Story from Beef Farmers of Ontario, and Tom Lewis from Ontario Sheep Farmers. So without this group pulling all the details together behind the scenes, these webinars would not be possible. So Lyndsey Smith and Chris Moore began Shady Creek Lamb Company in 2017. The Ottawa area farm is committed to raising a grass-based sheep flock and uses innovative grazing arrangements to grow the farm business. Now in the fifth full year of grazing solar sites, 2021 marked the addition of fall grazing of cover crops on other farmers' land. So yeah, we're gonna start with our video farm tour, and then Chris and Lyndsey will tell us a little bit more about their operation.
Hi, I'm Christine O'Reilly. I'm the forage and grazing specialist with OMAFRA, and today I'm out on farm with Chris Moore and Lyndsey Smith. They're going to tell us a little bit about their operation and what they're doing with cover crop grazing.
So we have a 100-acre farm just outside Kinburn in the Ottawa Valley, west of the city of Ottawa, technically within Ottawa city limits. Capped by land, we've tried to branch out and do some different things. So we solar graze from May to October, and then from October on we move into cover crops. Here we're at a neighbor's farm on a field of oats and peas that we planted with the plan of taking for forage for the winter, but it didn't turn out, so now we're grazing it.
We had last year, so in 2021, one of our neighbors had planted cover crops for the first time and had managed to get them in the first week of August-ish, and they had grown beautifully, and he was quite overwhelmed by how much biomass was there and sort of wanted to know if we would graze it off for him. And he and Chris are good friends. They had a chat about it, and basically within a few days Chris had moved our ewe lambs onto those cover crops, and then we did some cornstalk grazing as well, or crop aftermath grazing at his farm last year, and it worked well. So this year, as Chris mentioned, we did put in this cover crop. We paid the seed, we put it in to take for hay. And but the season got away on us a little bit in that we had some pretty major rain events in between the first planting of one field and the planting of this field. And so Chris basically said to the farmer, we can't take it as hay, we've run out of season, what do you think, could we graze it? So it wasn't actually the plan from the beginning, but the farmer was very okay with us using it for cover crops for hay. And Chris is very persuasive and managed to say, can we? He said yes. And how long did it take to get the ewe lambs here?
Well, I don't think I'm that persuasive, but he recognized the value of manure for being a former dairy farmer. We were about 2 or 3 days later before we got our first ewe lambs here. They're at the far end of the farm right now, and the plan was to keep them out of sight. The dogs wouldn't disturb them, and didn't have to worry about the sheep on the lawn or nothing. That worked so well that we just brought another about 200 more mature ewes, and they're up by the house, and they'll kind of meet in the middle once we're done.
To take a guess, how many days grazing do you think you're going to get off this year?
I don't know. We're doing about 120 grazing days per acre. It is a 50-acre piece, but that is a variable too, because that would be mature ewes over here that we're more or less in maintenance for, and it's just salvage value of what we hope to take as forage. The far end we have ewe lambs that we are trying to get to breeding weight as quick as we can, because we know that that's a benchmark. Those ewe lamb is yearlings, that's a huge profit driver. So we're pushing them a little harder to eat more, and in which case eat more better. So we're not getting as many days grazing as we would be with mature ewes.
So just to kind of help us get our heads around it, so you're saying about 120 ewe days per acre, and then what size is that mature group over there?
That's about 200 ewes
Okay.
on 4 acres. So we'll move them every 3 to 4 days.
Okay, and then how many of the ewe lambs do you have in the other group at the other end?
So I think we're somewhere around 240, 250 ewe lambs that went in. Yeah, coyote pressure's definitely already been an issue. I think we're ahead of it, touch wood. We'll see. We'll keep adding dogs. But they are getting, as Chris said, it's a bit of a bigger mob. Paddock size similar?
No.
They're smaller, right?
So to try and beat coyotes, I'm making smaller paddocks, more frequent moves, having more fences up that, okay, maybe the coyote made it through one fence, but now they have to make it through another. There's still guard dogs. And the smaller area, so it's a little easier for the dogs too. It's just trying to make it different and more hard.
When was this seeded?
This was middle of August, roughly. It was planted with a seed drill, and like a conventional seed drill, and a packer right behind. It's a mix of about 30% peas and 50-50 mix after that of oats and barley. The mix was created by, can I say names and stuff? Valley Bio up in Cobden, and we've worked with them grazing cover crops too. It was their suggestion of what we did, and I think we did about 120 to 150 pound per acre of that mix. I really like the oats and peas. I don't know if I do barley again. There's lots of volunteer wheat, so I think we could have skipped the barley and just done the oats and peas, and maybe heavier with the oats for sure.
And did this get any fertility special to the cover crop?
We didn't do any fertility ourselves. Having a look at some of my buddy's stuff, having that starter of, I don't know what he put in, but he had some starter on his oats, and I think it definitely paid on his. That it's something I would have liked.
Are you seeing any rust problems in the crop?
We're not. It's a forage variety of oats, and knowing Ruben at Valley Bio, he would have selected an oat variety that would have had good natural immunity.
Perfect. Yeah, because we know rust is one of the biggest problems growers have with forage, like growing oats for forage. So it's good to know they've got some forage varieties that have some rust resistance to them.
Question for you.
Yeah.
The oats that have rust, will sheep not eat them, not perform as well? What's the issue?
It doesn't produce any mycotoxins. It's not going to make livestock sick. But the rust fungus is eating some of the sugar and protein in that plant. So the nutritional value does go down a bit, and the palatability goes down. So once you get really high rust levels, you will start to get some refusals. Cattle and sheep just won't eat it. And you know, if you get really high rust levels, it's possible that they might start coughing a bit, but usually you'll get feed refusals before you hit that stage. So yeah, it's a palatability and a nutritional quality issue, which is why we are hearing about more producers applying fungicides to their forage oats just to keep that under control. But there's varieties out there that do have some rust tolerance, so it's worth looking into those as well to save the pass. What's the signal to bring them home? How long do you stay out, or when do you decide to pull them off?
We will run out of feed before it's winter enough for cover crops. Now, if it was crop aftermath, I think you get frozen ground, because we'll do some corn stalks too. Once that ground's froze, the crop aftermath is done. But for forage crop, like fall cover crops, I haven't had snow deep enough yet.
Okay, so
as long as I can put fences up and take them down.
So what's the latest you were able to graze?
Last year we grazed till January 13th.
Wow.
In Renfrew County.
Yeah, that's long. That is definitely a long grazing season. How much snow did you have when you were pulling them off that field in Renfrew?
There was good snow banks to make a road to get the sheep to the trailer. I would say it was well over a foot.
And they were able to dig through that?
Yeah.
Wow. So, dropping sheep off is easy, but getting them home can be a bit of a challenge. What do you guys do to round these guys up when there's no more grazing left?
Because we're really close to home, It's only maybe 2 kilometers from the far end of the field, which is the closest to home. We're gonna try quads and dogs and just walking them. If it was a little farther from home, we have a mobile yard that we can set up and move the sheep home into trailers that way. But definitely something to think of before you start doing this is how do you bring them home. I'm Chris. I am the forage and grazing specialist with Shady Creek. This gets edited, eh? Okay.
All right. So, I'm going to turn it over to Chris and Lyndsey now. They can expand a little bit on the farm tour we just saw.
Here we go. There. Start there. I'll be right back.
All right. So Lyndsey just did some math. We were there for about 30 days. So
about 35 days.
35 days.
550 sheep.
550 sheep on a 45-acre field, I think, approximately. So if anybody wants to do the grazing days, because the grass kept growing. So anyways, the rest of the season, our sheep move out in about April to May, and they graze under solar panels. So they do the vegetation abatement there. And so fall grazing of cover crops and crop aftermath was a pretty natural fit for our sheep because they're pretty functional and at grazing. Look at that. So last year was our first year doing cover crop grazing, and it was doing it at a friend, neighbor, peers farm down the road, and he was a little nervous about, but he was a little bit nervous about no-tilling into it the following year and the carbon penalty of having all that grass and stuff on top. So we just, a couple drinks leads to another thing, and came up with the idea maybe the sheep could take the tops down, leave the roots in place, and cycle those nutrients for the next crop to be on. And I think he's going to have us back again this year. We just haven't made it there yet. We did a couple different sites with different forages, so we kind of got to see what the sheep really like to eat and what they don't like to eat and what they won't eat. So buckwheat, while maybe it liberates phosphorus, I believe, in the soil very well, sheep do not like eating it, but that hasn't been an issue yet. Stuff like tillage radish, they will eat, but usually after a frost. Oats and peas are by far their favorite. 3 sites, 4 groups, 3 types of forage. I think I just kind of covered that.
Well, this is this year. So this year, this is the site that we did the video on. So this is about a 45-acre field. So we bought the seed, we planted this, and another 45-acre field that we did take for hay, and this one we grazed. So this is a different farmer. This one's a little closer to home than 2021. These are our ewe lambs.
Replacement ewe lambs
in this group.
So that one of the things with them on cover crops is we're really trying to push them to grow as fast and as big as we can, because we know if they can make it to 80 pounds, they're that much more likely to breed and lamb as yearlings, and that's a big profit driver in the sheep business.
I'll just note it's giving us a mention that our internet's unstable. So Christine, if you can just unmute and tell us if we need to go over anything, that would be great. All right. So just quickly, I'll go over. So this is a picture from 2021. This was up in Renfrew. This is one of the fields that particular group was on until January. And that you can see the tillage radish in there, which smells lovely once it starts to rot, let me tell you. But on each of the fields we've been grazing now with covers, it has been this field that you're looking at, that's from last year. That Ruben put in, I think,
I believe it was winter triticale that
Yeah.
he was growing for a seed crop.
So in this instance, he put in the cover crop. We brought the sheep and did the work.
Oh, why people should graze sheep instead of cattle? Well, cattle are easier to fence, but scarier if they get out. Sheep will usually come back because they're scared that something's going to kill them. The water demand of the cattle is probably going to be higher than the sheep. Right now, I'm keeping 260 or 250 ewe lambs well watered with 20-liter pail of water while they're on the cover crops because they're green and lush, and sheep have pretty water going across the field. Sheep are a big wind. The sheep very rarely do they leave they're not leaving ruts or much imprints. If anything, they just kind of seem to smooth out, like where between the seed drill runs, they just kind of level that out with their little feet. Handling facilities for sheep is pretty affordable and easy to move around. And another reason you should graze sheep instead of cattle is we only have 2 cows, but we have lots of sheep, so sheep should eat the cover crops.
Mm-hmm. They're 2 very beautiful cows, we should note, but we don't have enough of them. We always get asked about water, and obviously it's a really important component to discussing this. It's one of the big ones for solar grazing. It's of course a big one when you're off site, but this is a huge advantage for sheep is quite literally that's that same group. Those are 2 of the Guardian pups. And now, yes, it's only 2 kilometers from home, so we are hauling water to this particular group. But quite honestly, with that green of a crop and in the cool season of the fall, the water is more for the dogs than the sheep. And so in this instance, it's not a huge issue. We also get asked, well into winter about water. Again, once there's snow, our mature ewes only really use snow for a water source through the winter. So it's much less of a concern versus cattle, let's say. But we also recognize we farm in the public eye. This is on a very major road, which Christine and James can attest to. And so we do want to ensure that anyone driving by would be able to easily identify that we have water for the dogs and the sheep.
And this water source was when we were grazing beside the Trans-Canada Highway and had even more cars. We wanted to make sure the landowner wasn't going to be basically harassed by people concerned that there wasn't water. So you make it real nice and obvious that he doesn't get phone calls and we don't have to deal with the SPCA or anything like that. This is also showing off our fencer setup. So the fencer is a speed rate in this one, but we have mostly Gallagher's now. Biggest solar panel we can afford, attached to a deep cycle nautical battery. Again, biggest we can afford at the time. Using a ground rod there. Would it be nicer if we had more of them and they went in deeper? Yes, but because we're doing such frequent moves, this was adequate. And we could move that around with the farmer's tractor, and we had a 3-point hitch pallet carrier on the back. So we just backed in, lifted up, and away it drove.
On some of our other sites or here at home and at the solar sites, we do have carts. So everything's on wheels, and we have similar setups for the solar and just move it around with quads. And talk about transport. This is our setup for one of them, but as Chris mentioned in the video, it is really key to have a plan because it is always easy to unload onto off the field and to their next location and or home.
An exit plan strategy is a really good idea, and it needs to be kind of fluid and functional because you could get into it 2 days and the landowner decides, you know what, I don't want the animals here, take them out. And if you don't have a plan for that, you're in trouble. This is the setup we use. So the mobile yard is behind the trailer.
This is the mobile yard chute, just so
it all folds up. So you need one vehicle to move it to where you're loading, and then another vehicle with the trailer to move the animals. When it comes to transportation regs, we do not need a manifest because we are maintaining ownership of the animals and they're moving within our own farm. And it doesn't matter the distance. It's the time off feed, water, and rest. So as long as we don't have them sitting in this yard for 2 days before we load them out, it's all good. Because I know that can be a bit of a concern for some people. And also, you don't need to manifest if you're walking them to the next farm or something either.
Which we will note, Chris did move the group of ewes today. And it will, but we can talk about that later. Okay, so one of the other sort of solar grazing, grazing off cornfields is an extension of that. Not suitable necessarily for ewe lambs, as we are trying to get that extra growth in the fall on our ewe lambs. But for our mature ewes, corn stalks have lots of goodies for them. And so we did over winter. Wow, they spent about a month on that field last year.
Yep.
So those were our mature ewes. They came off the solar and went straight to the corn stalks. And then, as I just mentioned, today, Chris moved that group of 200 that you see in the video and that were on the covers. They just moved to one farm or two farms closer to home down the road, so towards us, onto corn stalks. There's about 150 acres of corn stalks there, or corn residue. We likely won't get over all of it, but that is another farmer that, after they saw what we were doing on the cover crops, had a conversation with Chris and said, bring them on by. So that's where they're off to next.
If you can convince one neighbor that's got good road frontage to do this, it's amazing how this can take off.
Oh, I'll see if this plays.
It's pretty choppy, Lyndsey, sorry.
That's okay, we'll skip it. That's just
the way she holds the camera.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's just that was Boxing Day last year up in Renfrew County. So yeah, that we didn't have a ton of snow by that point in the season. Did make for that extended grazing all the way to January 13th. Okay, lovely video for everybody, or photo here. Chris alluded to it earlier that, you know, if you move sheep in and the landowner wants them gone, you need a plan. I would say if we were very new to sheep or new to this, we probably would have pulled our sheep out in the first 2 weeks, in that we lost probably about 8 ewe lambs in 14 days. By when we, 2 coyotes, they moved in within the first day. We had people driving by and then texting us and saying, hey, there's a coyote in your sheep flock. They were very bold. And so it was really hard, emotional. We have, for the past several years in the solar, had very few losses, if any. This year, though, both at home and on the covers, not at the solar, but at home and at the covers, we have had significant losses. So we did add dogs. Chris added fences. And it seems to be that we've sort of evened out now, and it's not as bad, but goodness, that was not a lot of fun. And
great for deer season.
Yeah, thankfully deer season started, and I think that helps. Okay, so we'll wrap up here on, because focus really is on farmers working together. As with Dave, the original farmer we did this with, he very much he knows the value of having crop residue cycle. And so having the sheep eat off that top growth and deposit it as manure and urine made sense to him. So I'd like to see how that plays out year over year. The other, that one field up at Renfrew, Ruben wasn't sure what he was going to do with it because of sort of the mess that was on it. But because the sheep did such a great job cleaning it off, it actually changed what he felt comfortable cropping the next year, which was a more, he sort of gained a year as far as not having to clean it up. So that was really beneficial for both farmers in that instance. And of course, what we gain, so this is that group last year up at Renfrew, we gain more feed. And for ewe lambs, definitely better gains. We are a grass-based flock, and we lamb in May. So in order to get those ewe lambs breeding around Christmas, they need to be well grown out for it to work, and you need good feed to do it. So it is a lot of work. There are definitely costs on our part, and I'm sure there'll be some questions about that, but we definitely gain a significant amount of grazing for a significant amount of ewes, and that really does take the pressure off of stored feed for sure.
It keeps me really fit too.
Yeah, Chris gets his steps in. All right. The bar's in the way, but
Has that been there the whole time?
yes, you just haven't noticed. No, they don't see it. Just we do. Anyway, when we've talked about this or thought about this, I always like if you don't ask, the answer is always no. So just like our one neighbor with the corn residue, yes, it was there, and you know, we could not ask and we for sure can't graze it, or we can ask and they can say no, but at least we asked. We sort of set out our expectations ahead of time, who's paying for what, who's going to do what. And of course we have a lot to learn, and a lot of that is still figuring out the dollars and cents of all this. Trucking is not cheap, but neither is making hay. So there's that too.
I'd rather walk sheep on and off corn stalks than truck them to them. I don't know. You can't be too far from home and be trucking animals to corn stalks, but cover crops are just such fantastic feed, and the way it helps ewe lambs grow to meet that, you know, target of being bred as a so they lamb as a yearling. It's huge. And I don't know, the one thing like I kind of look for are people that are really good farmers that are really busy, whether that's just they have a really big busy farm or they're busy off farm, and they want to have the value of manure, the benefits of cover crops, and they don't want the commitment of livestock. 365.
It means that
356. How many is it?
however, it's 365. But definitely it needs to get sheep. There are plenty of people with sheep, but we can work together and we can both win. And so, of course, none of this would be possible without our farming neighbors. And so big thanks to them. And it was really exciting. I'll tell you this, everyone, in putting this presentation together, I modified one we had done on last year's experience, and it was really satisfying to add some names to that list of the people that we're working with, because it's working well and we're pretty excited about it.
And it's working with people. We're professional sheep farmers and grazers, and they're professional farmers growing crops. So you can't be a perfect person and, you know, managing livestock, crops, machinery, and marketing. So you might as well partner up if you can.
Yeah. All right, so I see there are a couple questions. Christine, do you want to go through them? We have one that is a direct message that I just wanted to quickly mention. The handling system and those gates that you saw that are aluminum, that is a Vino. So Vino makes head gates, and they make some goat and sheep handling equipment and feeding equipment. So we ordered that from their person here in Ontario.
One of the questions.
So to keep us on time, we're going to do a bit of a lightning round. So when you graze corn stalks, are they from silage corn or grain corn?
Grain.
Grain.
How many joules do you get with your solar fencer?
On reels right now, I'm getting 9.1. On the nets, way less. I definitely prefer on reels right now to nets.
On corn.
Especially corn stalks, but the economics everywhere.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you know your average daily gain on those ewe lambs?
That's a great question.
Nope.
Next.
No, but I will say this. Last year we trucked in 3 with that trailer. We
2 loads, took out 3.
Yeah, we trucked in 2, took out 3, and they were there about a month. So they grew. And we had 75% conception rate on our ewe lambs, which is really good.
It was the same truck and trailer both in and out.
Yeah.
Too,
so just that's
so you did just bring a smaller trailer.
Yeah, exactly. Like, oh my gosh. Yeah. Anyway,
all right.
So there you go. No.
There are a few more great questions in the chat, so we'll save those for after the formal program, but I'm looking forward to some more discussion about what you guys are doing. So thank you so much, Chris and Lyndsey. So I'd like to welcome our next speaker. Mark didn't send me an intro, so he doesn't know what I'm going to say. But Mark Brock and his wife Sandy farm down near Hensel, Ontario. Their operation is Shepherd's Creek Farms. Did I get that right?
Yep, Shepherd Creek.
And Mark is a 2019 Nuffield Scholar. So the Nuffield Scholarship Program, farmers get to pick a topic that they want to learn more about, travel all over the world, meet with experts and innovative farmers, learn stuff and bring it back home, not only to benefit their own operations, but also to share with farmers in their area so that we can all learn stuff. So Mark is going to share with us tonight the results of his Nuffield Scholar project, which was collaboration and farmers working together. So Mark, I'll let you take it away.
Perfect. It's a pleasure to be on here tonight. And I'm just going to put some caveats around this. I'm looking at this through a grain farmer lens. We do have sheep on our farm. Sandy manages the sheep side. I am the grain farmer, and kind of that's my focus. And as I go through the presentation, I don't want this to be negative. I just really want to have a conversation around how farmers make decisions and business decisions, or just whether they want to work with a livestock farmer to graze or not. But as Christine said in the intro, I did this Nuffield study, and it was a topic that kind of piqued my interest around farmer to farmer collaborations because of this first slide. If you look at it, the blue line dotted there is 1981. I was a wee lad back then, but it really shows kind of the spread of where the bulk of the farmers were. And there was a lot of mid-sized farm operations really from this data. And then Alphon Weersink at the University of Guelph with a whole bunch of other economists did a study in 2016. And you can see that kind of shift where there isn't that happy medium anymore in those numbers, that really a large amount of the farm income generated in Canada is coming from large operations, and we just don't have those smaller operations anymore. And when I look at our own farm operation that Sandy and I have, some might think it's large, some might think it's small, but I think we fall in that awkward area where as we look at doing some business decisions or capital purchases, it was just becoming a little bit more difficult to do those because we just didn't have the economies of scale to make those decisions. So I'm like, well, how do you solve that problem? Like if you look at a neighbor of mine that's a grain farmer, a good friend of mine, we both wanted a strip till rig that was 12 rows on our farm. We wanted a newer model that had some better features on it. Well, we just both couldn't justify buying a 12 row each. So we actually went together and bought one together. So it's examples like that that I kind of thought about, of like, how can farmers work better together in collaborations? And, I carry the bias of just, grain farmer working with a grain farmer. But I think today's conversation, I want to kind of look at, how do we look at livestock farmers and grain farmers? And is there ways that they can find kind of a common why or goals to work together so that we can kind of address some of these trends that we're seeing on the farm income side? But I think the biggest mistake I did when I first started my study was I really looked at this idea of collaborations through an economic lens. And I think there's a lot more to making decisions on farm than just economics. Economics play a big role. And I think, we need to be astute business people and make the proper decisions. But there's a bit more to the economics because there's a lot of emotion on the farm as well. And I think a lot of times farmers have this attitude because we kind of we're independent people. We try to kind of work by ourselves, and we have this kind of individualistic approach to what we do. It's always this attitude of what's in it for me, and that's kind of inherent in our DNA a little bit. And I think it adds a challenge to looking at how we do collaborations. And I think the most interesting thing when I started talking to farmers just in general, especially in North America, US and Canadian farmers, there's a lot of pushback to this idea of working together. And I think that speaks to that kind of individualistic approach that we have to farming, and we got to do it by ourselves. It's all on our shoulders. And it's hard to kind of ask for help or work together. So it was really interesting. And a little clip over here, just the picture is, I stayed on a farm in Tasmania that had 10,000 head of sheep that they graze over. Ironically, it was old poppy opium plantation that was converted to crops, and they grow basically crops that they graze through with this sheep operation. So it's kind of neat. But kind of over my 2 years of doing my my study and my travel and writing my paper, I did, I don't know, 30 or 40, 50 interviews with people about collaborations and, you know, what their thoughts were around them, and, you know, what works, what doesn't work. But the funny part about all of those interviews is that I really got into the psychology around how farmers make decisions. So if you take Chris and Lyndsey, who've done a really good job of approaching farmers in the neighborhood or having farmers approach them around, you know, grazing cover crops, there's a bit more to that decision than maybe just economics and other things. So there's like this whole thing I want to kind of talk about, which is like behavioral economics and how the psychology of farmers kind of play a role and how they make decisions on their farm, and whether they're maybe open to the idea of working with a livestock producer to let them graze cover crop or corn stover or crop stover. So really when it comes down to it, in my paper and my studies, there's kind of two approaches to decision making through an economic lens, and especially through this kind of topic I call behavioral economics. And there's been a lot of work done on this back through the 70s, and even more so kind of through the 2000s here and lately. There's I can't remember the author, but there's a book called Nudge, which kind of talks towards decision making and nudging people towards making that decision, and it's all around this behavioral economics. So when you look at economics, there's two real kind of approaches. One is rational choice theory, and these are decisions that we make on the farm, and they're purely based, or even just in general in life, are purely based on economic results or economic outcomes. They're very predictable, and they have predictable choices, and they're very practical and non-emotional. You know, it's something like you go to the grocery store, there's 2 cans of soup that pretty much are identical. One's 50 cents cheaper. You're going to buy the one that's 50 cents cheaper. It's just, it's a rational idea. It's very predictable. Where on the flip side of that, prospect theory here is really how decisions are influenced by the prospect of either a gain or a loss. So whether you perceive a gain by making that decision, or you are more concerned about the potential loss if you were to make that decision. And I'm going to get into this a bit more, but I just kind of want to hit these at a high level. And under prospect theory, these choices are very based on emotional and, you know, got to go back. Emotions play a role in it. Sometimes it can be unpredictable outcomes or decisions. So you look at someone who made a choice around buying that pickup truck versus another one, and you're like, that makes no sense at all. That kind of falls under this idea of prospect theory. They may be unpractical. And as I said, as people, these choices are really heavily influenced by the fear of loss versus any potential gain. So I decided to kind of look at this through this topic that's being discussed on the webinar around, you know, grazing cover crops. So I threw this scenario together, and by no means is this what happens or whatever. It's just something I'm going to use an example to help illustrate some of the thought processes around farmers having, you know, making decisions like a grain farmer, whether they want to work with the livestock. So you can see here, a grain farmer puts in a cover crop on his wheat stubble. It costs $45 an acre. That's seed and planting. And they have an area livestock producer that comes around and says, you know, I'd really be interested in grazing that cover crop. And that livestock farmer says, I'll do all the work. I'll put up the net fencing. I'll be responsible for all the animals, and I'll pay you $65 an acre to, you know, compensate that any fear that you might have of, you know, a negative impact. But, you know, under this assumption, I'm assuming that there's no negative impact on next year's crop. So if you take this scenario and kind of apply the rational choice theory of economics to it, which is kind of based purely on economics, no emotions, predictable outcome, then if you look back at the scenario again, you know, the grain farm would say, well, yeah, that makes sense. It covers the cost of the seed and the planting, and I'm making $20 an acre above that. So that makes complete sense to me, I'm going to say yes to the livestock farmer, and life goes on and everybody's happy. But I think we all know that that isn't really what happens in real life. And this is kind of where you kind of get more into this behavioral economics on the prospect theory side, where it's not maybe a rational decision, or it's unpractical, or it's influenced by some other means than just the pure economic result of the agreement or the process. So I want to spend a little bit of time on this prospect theory, because what it really talks about is that if I were to give you $100, just walked up to you and gave you $100, you would experience that positively. So that would be a positive value. So the value of that would go up. You'd feel good about it. You know, it was a great outcome. You're pretty happy about it. So that you're like, wow, $100, this is awesome. But if I came back 5 minutes later, and even if I gave you the $100, I took it away, you would actually have more emotional feeling to the loss of me taking that $100 from you than you would have had positive for me giving it to you. So really what prospect theory is saying is that we actually feel loss, we experience the fear of loss more than we do the pleasure of gain. We're more fear-averse of losing something than we are of having, you know, the positive experience of having a gain. So kind of why is this? Like, what plays a role in some of these negative, you know, or fear of loss and some of this decision making? So, you know, why is there some irrational decisions made? And I think it really comes down to a lot of the biases that we carry as farmers. And that's the one thing I really ran into when I was doing my interviews and meeting with farmers from around the world, is that we carry a lot of biases. And these are probably the 5 that I think really impact us in agriculture the most. By no means this is all of them, but you know, I can attest that a lot of these influence some of the decision making I do on the farm here. I just want to talk about some. I want to talk about these 5 quick, just to kind of give you a definition of them in my eyes, and how I feel they're kind of impacting the decision making. Or, you know, as you approach a grain farmer about grazing cover crop, what are these biases? You know, how are these biases of the grain farmer, or even your own, impacting that conversation or the outcome of the decision? Where the grain farmer might say, no, I don't want you to graze my cover crop, or yes, I'm interested. So, you know, if you look at the first one, confirmation bias, you know, it's that one that John Deere tractors are the best. They're only good tractor, and Case tractors suck. You know, that's that idea that, you know, you confirmed it already. It's like Ford versus Chevy. It's whatever. There's all those ideas that, you know, on the grain side of things, Pioneer corn is the best and everything else is no good. You know, we just read stuff, we socialize around people that, you know, confirm that bias of ours. We tend not to listen to, you know, other people's ideas, you know, and it might be, you have some friends, grain farmers, buddies, that you're drinking beer and they say, well, grazing cover crop's not a really great idea. And they're just confirming that bias among a group of other people. So that's one that, you know, I think we see heavily in agriculture. Gut instinct bias too is the one that I think, because we're so busy as farmers in our day-to-day jobs, that we get stuck in having to make really quick decisions, and we go off of historical perspectives or historical experience. So, you know, and that's kind of that gut instinct bias where, you know, I saw cattle get out one time. I hate fences, or I had a coyote attack on my sheep once. And I don't want to do it again. I don't want to deal with it. I don't want my, you know, I don't want my sheep outside, or I don't want my cattle over there anymore because of that. It's just one of those quick instinctual decisions that you make because of that inherent gut instinct bias that you have. Status quo is another big one that I think really kind of rears its head on the farm, where it's just a lot simpler to keep doing what you're doing, right? So as a grain farmer, I plant cover crop after wheat. I like to strip till at the end of August, 1st of September, spray it off, by the last part of September. That's my plan. That's how I always do it. I don't want to do it any other way. It's just that's my system. So it's just status quo. I don't want to change. There might be a fantastic opportunity with a livestock farmer, but for me, it's just easier to keep doing what I'm doing. And the social influence bias is a good one. Like with Chris and Lyndsey kind of talking there, where if you have sheep grazing out on a fairly busy road and other farmers see the sheep out there and see what they're doing, they're like, well, maybe that's not such a bad thing. So as farmers, we can be influenced both positively and negatively around social influence. So one might be just, I don't see any other farmers doing it, so I don't want to be the first one to do it. I don't want that to be that person. Or on the positive side, I see someone doing it, looks really awesome, I want to do it too. And then there's the last one. This is an overconfidence bias, where I'm a grain farmer, I know everything. I think the sheep are going to compact, or the cattle are going to compact my ground, and I just don't want them out there. I'm smarter than everybody else. And that's maybe a little maybe harsh, but we do carry some overconfidence bias as farmers when we go around making decisions. So these kind of things are always sitting in the back of our minds when we go to make decisions and play a role in that. And so when we go back to this idea of how we actually put more value in losses than we do on perceived gains, as our biases kind of influence our decision making, they can increase that perception of loss and give us a more negative attitude towards the potential of something, versus that idea of that it actually would be a positive outcome and there's some good gain to it. So it's this idea, as I said, the bias is kind of just enhancing our negative view of things and the perceived potential for loss, and we're loss averse as humans, and we just don't want to experience that loss. So it's kind of a really quick and dirty explanation of prospect theory, and I'm probably not even doing it justice, because it took me like a super long time to wrap my head around this idea. But I think it really, as I look at our farm operation, I really see how that idea of how we make decisions on our farm are influenced by the biases, influence around the fear of loss, more so than the potential of gain, that we are kind of doing things. And it's really, I think, important as producers that we're aware of those biases that we have as individuals, but also be aware of those potential biases that you have when maybe you're engaging with someone about wanting to graze their cover crop. So if we go back to the scenario again, with the grain farmer, and we kind of apply this idea of having just more than economics part of the decision making, we get into this idea of what the grain farmer might say. Well, it seems like a really good offer from the livestock producer, but the grain farmer is afraid that the livestock farmer will get more of the deal. This perceived idea that someone's getting ahead of you, and that you have more to lose out of it than you have to gain, because they're going to gain it all. You might look at the idea that the compensation or the risk is not enough to warrant doing something different. This status quo is just easier, even though I might make a bit more, or the potential to make a bit more on our farm. It's so much easier for me to keep doing what I'm doing. And as I said about this social kind of influence around you, there's no other grain farmers doing it around me. So, if they're not doing it, then why should I do it? But I don't know. I don't want to be the first one kind of idea. And then this kind of overconfidence of the grain farmer says, I don't care what you tell me. I don't care about the manure, the benefits of soil health, the bacteria after going through the rumen, going back to the soil. I don't care. I think it's going to be a negative impact on my crop because I'm smarter than you. that overconfidence. And then really just sometimes it gets into that, just the workflow of the grain farmer, where the kind of the gut instinct side of things, where just, I don't want to interrupt in my workflow. This is how I, status quo bias as well. This is how I do things. It's just really easier to say no than to do something different. So, those are some of the things of, why there's that maybe resistance you see from farmers or landowners when you might want to approach them about either your grazing cover crop or corn stock or corn residue or crop residue, is that, some of these might be going around in the back of the mind. And I think we're all aware of it, but I think it helps understanding the challenges you have when you want to maybe collaborate with a farmer, that you kind of have to be a bit selective, I guess would be the best thing to say, around trying to find people that, you can talk about these buts. So when I look at it and kind of looked at different collaborations from a farmer to farmer standpoint from around the world, and I kind of spent a lot of time in Australia talking about this, because they're very good at farmer to farmer collaborations there. But when you look at it, a recipe for a really positive collaboration is you have to have a common goal, a why, or an understanding of outcomes. And I really enjoyed the one slide that Chris and Lyndsey had, where they kind of talked about, it needs to be on paper. There needs to be kind of a common understanding of what the outcomes are for both parties, because I think that's the thing, is that both parties have to come out of this feeling confident that they're getting their goal addressed or their goal met through this collaboration. And the first thing, after understanding that you both have some common goals or common outcomes that could be met through a collaboration, is that you probably are getting the people part right. And the people part's probably the most important part of any collaboration. You're not going to go to a grain farmer that you've kind of had a rocky relationship with and approach them about grazing the cover crop. But you're probably going to go to one that you see that they leave their cover crop out a little longer. It's untouched. They aren't really doing anything. They let it overwinter. They let it winter kill. There's someone there that you might have a common goal with, because you won't be impacting their workflow or other things through the fall process when they want to set up for next year's crop that they're putting in. So, you have to get that people part right, because if you get the people part right, kind of everything else looks after itself, and it just kind of stuff starts to fall into place. And maybe Chris and Lyndsey can talk about that, what their experiences they've had, kind of doing the work with neighbors on grazing cover crop and crop residue. And the other thing, the last thing about, I think, having a positive collaboration is that there needs to be some formal agreement, and it can be as simple or as complex as it needs to be. And really what that comes down to is that, it might be a single piece of paper that lists the grain farmer's goal or the landowner's goals and your goals as the livestock grazer, so that, you both can look at it and identify it and measure your success against that, right? Because I think you do have to measure some form of success against that agreement. When you're done grazing the cover crop, did it meet the landowner or grain farmer's goals? Did it meet your goals? So when I kind of look at these collaborations, I talk about the people part, there tends to be, I call them elements, but, I guess that's eight kind of human elements that I think that are important to a collaboration. And they're kind of weighted here with the dotted blue line based on, so I basically went through all my interviews that I did through my Nuffield study and kind of looked at common trends. And these were the 8 kind of surfaced human elements that surfaced out of the interviews that were important, and kind of weighted them a little bit. But, you can see trust. There has to be trust in any kind of collaboration. I think like-minded is important, innovative, positive mindset. You can see these. I'm not going to read them off, but you can see how these are kind of important to collaborations. And I think it's important to look at these as well when you go to find someone to work with. around maybe grazing cover crops on someone else's land or working with someone that way, because these seem to be pretty key components to having someone that's open-minded to the idea of a collaboration and willing to have maybe a further discussion around options and are maybe less influenced by the personal biases. And then when you get into the structure part, which I say is a formal part of the collaboration, you know, you need to have some of this stuff part of it. And some, as I said, some of these collaborations are a little bit more robust than just an agreement between two people around grazing cover crops. You know, it could be actual sharing of a capital asset, you know, equipment, or it could be sharing of some livestock genetics where two farmers go together to buy a decent bull to share among the two farms. So some of this needs to be there, but I think there needs to be accountability for sure in a collaboration. Both parties have to be accountable, and I think you also have to make sure that there's an exit plan, or if there's a disagreement at some point in the collaboration, that there's a way to address it. And really, at the end of my, I think 47-page paper I wrote in 2 years of traveling and studying this topic, I wanted to try to condense it as small and concise as I could. And really what I did here was create a flow chart or a decision tree to help people with collaborations. And there may be it might be a little bit more formal than it needs to be for what we're talking about tonight, but you know, it really falls into, are you interested in a collaboration? Do you have a common goal or a why? And if you do, then proceed. If you don't, it's not going to work. And as you go down, you have to kind of get the people part right. And if the people are compatible, then keep going. And if the people aren't compatible, then it's not going to work. And then you just get down to the different types of collaborations. But I still think no matter what type of collaborations I have, like a peer group here or businesses or organizations, I still think it's important to have some key performance indicators, KPIs. I think you need to measure success. It doesn't have to be super complicated, but I just think at the end of that kind of term of, say, the agreement of grazing the cover crop with the landowner, farmer, and the livestock operator that's grazing, that they have a chat to make sure that it met both their goals. And if it didn't, how can that be, you know, addressed for next year and stuff like that. So collaborations are really awesome. They can be very powerful. It takes the right people to do it, to be in them. I think what influences people's ability to collaborate really goes back to their biases they have and their decision-making process. But, you know, as I said, I'm not trying to be negative that it won't work or people aren't open to the idea of it. But I think as someone like a livestock farmer that wants to graze cover crop or corn stover or crop residue, you're selling an idea to somebody, and to sell that idea to somebody, you have to be aware of how they make decisions, the psychology around decision making, how their biases play a role, and then, you know, kind of from there understand whether you're compatible as people to work together. And then once you kind of get that figured out, then I think the rest really starts to look after itself. But I think with that, I'm just going to wrap it up, because I see if there's questions, comments. I'm open to comments and all the other stuff. So I'm going to stop sharing and I will leave it there. It was kind of a quick and dirty.
All right. Thank you so much, Mark. I think we've got time to take 1 or 2 questions before we wrap up. So, where can someone get a copy of your paper?
You can the Nuffield Canada's website. I don't know what the actual website is, but my Nuffield study lives there. I think
I did stick a
there
link
is a
in.
link there. So if you're really bored and want to fall asleep some night, you can read it. But it goes a little bit more in depth than I did tonight. I find it really fascinating, the psychology around how farmers make decisions. And I think it's just really interesting.
Okay. This one may be better suited to more general discussion at the end, but are there liability risks if livestock are on another landowner's property?
Chris and Lyndsey here.
Mostly Chris at this
Yeah. So we bring a ton of insurance, and it kind of goes with the other comment. Would you pay?
Yeah.
Would you pay for cover crop to graze? And we bring our insurance. We put in a lot of work to make sure that the residue is managed to the farmer landowner's wants and needs, and that manure is distributed very evenly. That no, we aren't going to pay for cover crops if we can help it, and we have enough cover crops that people want us to go graze and crop aftermath that we're not really eager to pay.
So I think
Not to shoot down the $65.
yeah. No, I mean there is a value per se, but there's also a value in bringing the livestock to the ground, right? So that what we have worked out, and I think Mike Swerdisky, who's another sheep grazer in the province, he figures 10 cents per ewe per day for yardage, which is his management, his fences, his dog, that sort of stuff. So there is an inherent cost in doing this. Trucking to the sites is not cheap, especially depending on where it comes from. And yes, we do carry extra insurance because we already graze off-site. And we actually carry a lot of risk in, like we saw with, so this particular Nuffield is only 2 kilometers away from home, but it's across a major road.
Nuffield to us, graze, not Nuffield.
Sorry, Mark, and trademark. And but the coyote pressure there, that's a whole other group of coyotes. Like we took on major losses by moving our sheep to a new area that wasn't used to having sheep at it. So,
and I have things to do all day long, and I need to sleep at night, and we have a family. I don't sit and wait for coyotes all day.
Either way, I figured it out that like on that field, the reason we paid to put the seed in was that we wanted to put up winter feed. We were short on winter feed. It was a great way to keep some wrapped bales close to home. That's the other question that was in there is we did take the earlier field that had about 60 days of growth. We did wrap it. Even wrapping it, we lucked out on some really good weather. It's pretty late in the season to try and make hay. So it went really well, but it could have gone the other way easily. So we were willing to front the seed cost. We paid more than typical because it wasn't a true cover crop. It was for hay, or the idea was to take it for forage. So we paid more in seed than perhaps you would if it were a straight cover.
And we put more peas in the cover crop mix because we knew the farmer wanted to have corn the next year, and he wanted the end from the peas.
Yes, which we did do. So yeah, go ahead.
So if anyone's interested in more examples, this is not the first year we've had this conversation. Cover crop grazing has been an ongoing, evolving conversation for 4 or 5 years now. So there are past webinars up on YouTube on the Field Crop News channel. So you can get some other insight on what people are paying. And to clarify, Mark's example was just to show differences in how people make decisions, not real numbers.